It began with a letter. Elena didn't expect anything unusual that morning. The sky was quiet. The coffee was warm. The mail was light, just 2 envelopes. One was a bill. The other was thick, yellowed, and addressed in careful handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly, feeling the old paper crackle between her fingers. Inside was a folded legal notice and a single page with a brief message. Miss Elena Moreau. I regret to inform you of the passing of your great-aunt Margaret Wren. You are listed as her sole heir. Included in the inheritance is her residence, a house located on Wren Hill. Please contact our office for transfer of deed and keys. With condolences. Robert Lang, Esq. Elena stared at the page for a long moment. She had no memory of a great-aunt Margaret. No one in her family ever mentioned her. And yet, the name Wren Hill stirred something. Like a shadow in the back of her mind. She looked up the address. It was real. A small house, marked as unoccupied. Tucked at the edge of an old forest, near a forgotten town. No pictures. No history. Just a listing. And now, it was hers. She went that same week. Not out of greed. Not even out of curiosity. But something in the name, Wren Hill, felt familiar. Like a word she used to say in dreams. The road was narrow and winding. By the time she reached the town, dusk had begun to fall. The GPS led her past rusted fences, tall grass, and old wooden signs faded by weather. The house sat at the end of a gravel path, surrounded by trees that bent inward, not like they grew that way, but like they were leaning in to listen. It was smaller than she expected. 2 stories. Gray. Still. Windows shuttered. Roof moss-covered. And yet, not abandoned. Just quiet. Waiting. She stepped out of the car. The air smelled of leaves and old stone. The gravel crunched softly under her boots. The key fit perfectly in the lock. And the door creaked open with a sound that seemed too loud for the stillness. Inside was darkness. But not cold. A hallway stretched ahead. Wood-paneled walls. Worn rug. Faint scent of lavender. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. Somehow, the shadows were enough. At the top of the staircase, something ticked. Softly. Like an old clock. But there was no clock. Just the slow, careful sound of time passing. Elena stood in the doorway, holding her breath. Then she whispered to no one. I've been here before. And somewhere upstairs, a floorboard answered with a soft sigh. Elena slept in the house that night. She hadn't planned to. She brought no suitcase, no food, no change of clothes. But after she wandered the halls and stepped through the quiet rooms, something about the place made her feel not safe, but held. Like the walls remembered her. Even if she didn't remember them. She found a bedroom on the 2nd floor. The door was already open. The bed was made. A thick quilt lay over the mattress, hand-stitched in dark blue fabric with faded red thread around the edges. The pillow smelled of cedar. There was a lamp on the nightstand, but she didn't turn it on. She liked the way the moonlight came through the slats of the shutters, silver lines across the wooden floor. She lay down without undressing. She didn't mean to sleep. But she closed her eyes, and the quiet wrapped around her like the quilt itself. And the house seemed to breathe. She dreamed of nothing. But woke just before dawn. It was still dark, the kind of deep gray that lives between night and morning. The sound that woke her wasn't loud. Just a gentle creak. Like someone shifting their weight on old floorboards. She stayed still, her eyes open. And slowly, softly, she heard the ticking again. Not like a clock. Not steady. It ticked, then paused, then ticked again. As if it was thinking. Or, waiting. She rose and padded barefoot across the wooden floor. The hallway was colder than before. She followed the sound, past the landing, down the narrow hall that led to a small door she hadn't noticed yesterday. It was painted the same color as the wall. She reached for the knob. It was already turned halfway. She pushed. Inside was a study. Dust floated in the air, catching the first hints of light. A desk sat beneath the window. On it, an old music box. Wooden. Carved with delicate birds. She picked it up. It didn't play. But it was warm. There were books on the shelves. Not many. All bound in worn leather. No titles. Just initials on the spines, M.W. She ran her finger along them. When she reached the last one, a paper fell out. Folded once. On it, in the same careful handwriting from the letter, was a single sentence. She knew you would come back. Elena read it again. She didn't remember ever being here. But the way the paper felt in her hand. The way the music box warmed under her fingers. The way the air moved, just slightly, as if the room had been holding its breath. It all felt like something left behind on purpose. Not forgotten. Hidden. Elena set the paper on the desk and turned the music box over in her hands. There was no key. No latch. Only a small groove at the bottom, shaped like a crescent moon. She pressed her thumb against it. A faint click. And the lid opened. Inside was a faded scrap of fabric, embroidered with tiny blue feathers, and a folded photo. Not a recent one. The colors were muted, almost gray. The paper was curled at the edges. It showed a woman standing on the porch of the very same house. Elena squinted at the face. The features were sharp, familiar. She had never seen her before, but something deep inside whispered. You know her. In the photo, the woman was holding a child. A toddler, maybe 3 years old. The child's face was turned slightly, as if distracted by something off-frame. The woman smiled. But her eyes were not looking at the camera. They were looking directly at Elena. A soft wind touched the back of her neck. She turned. No one was there. But the door to the hallway was now open wider than before. She had left it only slightly ajar. Now it was open enough for someone to pass through. She stepped back into the hall. The ticking sound had stopped. But in its place was something else. A low hum. Barely audible. Almost like someone humming a lullaby from the far end of the house. She followed it. The hallway turned left, leading to the attic stairs. She didn't remember seeing them before. They were narrow. Steep. The hum grew slightly louder. Not threatening. But deliberate. Each step creaked under her weight. Dust clung to the air like sleep. At the top, she found a small wooden door, slightly ajar. She pushed it open with one finger. The attic was filled with light. Soft gray light from a round window that looked out toward the woods. Inside were trunks. Old chairs. Drapes covered in linen cloth. And in the center, a small crib. Rocking. Slowly. But there was no breeze. No one had touched it. And still, it moved. She approached. Inside the crib was a small pillow and a bundle of cloth. Folded neatly. Like it was waiting. She sat down beside it. The humming had stopped. But the silence now felt different. Not empty. Not watching. Listening. Elena didn't touch the cloth bundle in the crib. She only watched it. There was nothing strange about it, not at first glance. But she had the sense that unwrapping it would feel too much like waking someone up. So she let it be. Instead, she looked around the attic. Everything was neat. Not clean, there was dust and fading, but nothing was broken, nothing scattered. No decay. Just stillness. As if the room had been placed in a kind of sleep of its own. She found a trunk in the corner. It wasn't locked. Inside were folded clothes, all hand-stitched and smelling faintly of dried herbs. At the bottom, there was a notebook. The first few pages were written in the same tidy script from the letter and the paper in the study. The words were slow and personal. A journal, maybe. She turned carefully through the pages. One short entry caught her eye. It read. She used to hum that tune before bed. Always the same one. Even when the house was quiet. Even when the woods leaned in close. She closed the book softly. That same hum, the one she heard earlier, came back to her in memory. Faint. Almost gentle. Like something meant for a child. But, wrong, somehow. Not unpleasant. Just strange in its persistence. Like it had been echoing long after it was meant to stop. Back downstairs, the house felt a little different. Warmer. Not temperature, but mood. As if it had shifted slightly in its sleep. She passed the front hall again and saw that the door she had entered through was now locked. Not by her. The bolt had been drawn from the inside. She didn't panic. The door still opened freely when she turned the handle. But the lock had moved on its own. Or someone had moved it. She returned to the study. The paper she left on the desk was gone. In its place was a different note. Same handwriting. Same yellowed paper. But now, a new message. She's starting to remember. Elena stared at the page. Her breath was quiet. The air didn't move. But the shadows in the corners of the room felt deeper now. Not darker. Just heavier. As if they'd been listening, too. Elena took the note in her hand and turned it over. There was nothing written on the back. But the paper smelled faintly of something sweet, lavender and dust. She held it to her chest for a moment. Then folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. She moved slowly through the house now. She no longer turned on lights. There was a soft logic to the shadows. They showed her what she needed to see. The more she moved, the more the house seemed to open. She discovered rooms that hadn't been there before. A small pantry behind the kitchen, filled with old glass jars. A linen closet with folded blankets still warm to the touch. A narrow door near the base of the stairs that led to a hidden sitting room. And beyond that, a narrow hallway she hadn't noticed. At the end of it, a mirror. The mirror was tall, almost to the ceiling. Its frame was dark wood, carved with winding vines and birds mid-flight. She stood before it, expecting to see herself. She did. But only mostly. The woman in the reflection wore the same clothes. Had the same hair. But her expression. It was like looking into a memory you didn't know you had. Not quite older. Not quite younger. Just different. And behind her, in the reflection only, the hallway extended farther. Much farther. Down into a hallway filled with soft golden light and open doors. Elena turned around. Behind her, only the short hall. The sitting room. The silence. She looked back at the mirror. The golden hallway was still there. Still warm. Still waiting. And her reflection tilted its head ever so slightly, as if to say, "Do you remember now?" She reached out to touch the glass. It was cool under her fingertips. But not smooth. There were grooves, like shallow carvings, just beneath the surface. Not visible, only felt. She traced them slowly. Letters. Words. Etched in faint patterns beneath the glass. She squinted and whispered aloud. You left. But you never really left. She stepped back. The reflection faded slightly, like fog on the surface. And her own image returned. Still her. Still unsure. But now, something more. Like the house had given back a piece of her she didn't know was missing. She turned and walked away. And as she did, she heard a soft click behind her. When she turned back, the mirror was gone. Just a wall. Smooth. Unbroken. As if the mirror had never been there. But in her pocket, the notes still warmed her fingers. And somewhere upstairs, the music box began to hum. By itself. The music box was humming when Elena reached the second floor. She could hear it from the bottom of the stairs, soft and rhythmic, like breath set to melody. She didn't rush. She took each step gently, as if not to wake something. The sound led her back to the room with the desk, the hidden study behind the narrow hallway. The box sat just as she'd left it. Lid closed. But the music came from inside, winding slowly through the stillness. She reached out and touched it. The sound stopped instantly. She opened the lid. This time, the fabric inside was gone. In its place was a slip of parchment. Thin. Delicate. Written in the same familiar script. You were the last one to sign it. Sign what? Elena turned the page over. Nothing else. She looked around the room. Nothing had moved. But then, in the far corner near the window, she saw a small leather-bound book she hadn't noticed before. It was resting on a wooden stool. Not dusty. Not hidden. Just, placed. As if someone had left it there for her. She picked it up. The cover was blank. Inside, the pages were lined. Most were empty. But a few had names. Dozens of them. Each written in the same careful hand. Some with dates. Some with brief messages. Thank you for the quiet. She remembered me. It's peaceful here. I found the key. I still dream of her. And then, on a page near the middle, one name stood out. Not because it was different. But because it was hers. Elena M. No date. No message. She stared at it. She hadn't written it. She was sure of that. And yet, it was her handwriting. Every curve. Every letter. Exactly hers. She sat down slowly in the chair by the desk. The air in the room was quiet again. But not silent. It felt full. Like the walls were holding breath. Like the house was watching gently, not out of suspicion, but recognition. She whispered into the stillness. When did I write that? There was no reply. But the floorboard under the desk creaked. And the stool where the book had rested was now empty. Later, when she returned to the guest book, her name was gone. In its place, a new message had appeared. Some things are remembered only when forgotten. She closed the book. She didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. Only curious. And a little sad. The next morning, the fog outside didn't lift. It hung low around the trees, silver and thick, like the forest had crept closer overnight. Elena stood at the upstairs window and watched it shift through the branches. It wasn't moving fast. Just circling, curling. Breathing. She turned from the window and noticed something new. The end of the upstairs hallway, where only a blank wall had been, now held a door. Dark wood. Brass handle. Unmarked. It had not been there the night before. She knew this the way you know your own bedroom. The way you know a freckle on your arm. The way you know when someone has quietly changed the ending of a dream. She approached it slowly. There was no sound from within. No draft. No hum. Only stillness. She turned the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. No keyhole. No visible mechanism. Just a firm resistance, as though the house itself had decided. Not yet. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. But then, just as she was about to step back, a sound. So soft it might have been imagined. A whisper. 2 syllables, no louder than a breath. Elena. She stepped back. She didn't speak. She didn't knock again. She simply looked at the door, nodded once, and whispered. I'll wait. The rest of the day moved slowly. She explored the lower levels of the house again. Some rooms had changed slightly. The kitchen was warmer. A teapot now sat on the stove, empty, but still faintly warm. The pantry door had new jars she didn't recall. One was filled with tiny feathers, blue-gray and soft as ash. The study now had a second chair. Facing the first. Empty. But someone had placed a book open on the desk, as if they'd been reading before being gently called away. That evening, she walked again past the locked door. Still shut. Still silent. But now, a slip of paper had been left on the floor beneath it. She bent down and picked it up. Same handwriting. Same scent of lavender and age. She's listening. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. But because it felt like a part of her was slowly waking. And if she slept, she feared that part might fall asleep again. The mirror did not return. The guest book remained closed. But the house, quiet and still, pulsed softly around her like a heartbeat. She whispered into the stillness. What am I meant to remember? And far below, in the foundation stones, the silence gave no answer. Only waiting. Elena woke to the sound of water. Not dripping. Not leaking. It was the sound of slow movement, like a stream winding through stones. But there was no stream nearby. She followed the sound downstairs, her feet light on the worn wood. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky outside remained heavy with fog. Still no sunrise. Only the dull silver glow behind thick clouds. The sound led her to the cellar door. She hadn't opened it before. It had always been there, under the stairs, but something about it had told her to wait. Now, the air near it felt damp. The wood was cold to the touch. She pulled it open. The steps creaked beneath her weight as she descended. Each breath filled her lungs with the scent of stone and wet earth. The cellar was darker than the rest of the house, not just in light, but in presence. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even unkind. But it was older. Much older. There were shelves of jars, some filled with dried herbs, others empty, others still holding things she couldn't name. Old wooden furniture stacked against the walls. Crates nailed shut. And in the center, a shallow pool of water. Round. Perfect. No pipes. No source. Just water. Clear, still, silent. And in the water, a reflection that wasn't her own. She knelt beside the pool and looked closely. The surface did not ripple. Her own image was faint, as if something beneath it held stronger claim. The face in the reflection was a woman. Familiar again. Too familiar. The same as the photo. The woman on the porch. This time, she smiled. And her lips moved. No sound came out. But Elena could read the shape of the words. You stayed. The cellar air grew colder. Behind her, she heard the creak of a footstep. But when she turned, no one was there. Only the shelves. The shadows. The quiet breath of earth. And yet, something had changed. A book now sat at the bottom of the stairs. One she hadn't brought. Its cover was velvet. Deep blue. Trimmed in silver. She picked it up and opened to the first page. Written inside. The second voice has entered the house. She read the sentence again. Then closed the book slowly. And whispered to the shadows. Is it mine? From upstairs, a door creaked open. The locked room. Elena climbed the stairs slowly. The book was still in her hand, blue velvet, cool to the touch, its silver corners warm where her fingers held them tight. She didn't rush. The house didn't like rushing. The door at the end of the hallway was open now. Not wide. Just enough for her to slip inside. She stepped through the threshold and into a room that should not have existed. It was not empty. It was still. No windows. No furniture. The walls were made of wood, but not the same kind as the rest of the house. They were lighter. Smoother. As if untouched by dust or time. The floor was stone. Cool, perfect, unbroken. And in the center, a chair. Wooden. Straight-backed. Facing a wall that looked just like all the others. Except, it breathed. Not literally. But with every blink, Elena saw a change in the grain of the wood. A slow shift. Almost imperceptible. Like the wall was remembering how to be something else. She sat in the chair. The blue book rested in her lap. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. The wall before her changed. A shimmer in the grain. And then, a flicker. Like candlelight behind thin cloth. A figure took shape, slowly. Not a person exactly. A shape made of presence. Elena's mouth opened slightly. Her breath came soft and steady. The figure spoke without voice. This is the last room. She felt the words more than heard them. They moved through her chest like warmth and fog. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The figure continued. This is where the forgetting ends. The walls pulsed, once. And suddenly, Elena remembered a single sound. A lullaby. The same melody she'd heard before, in the attic, in the night, in the bones of the house. She began to hum it. Softly. And as she did, the figure bowed its head. And vanished. When she looked down, the book had opened. The pages turned on their own. One by one, flipping gently in a wind she could not feel. Until they stopped. On a page filled with lines of text. Written in her hand. Memories. Names. Dates. Smells. Sounds. Pieces of things long buried. And at the bottom. You left her once. Not again. The room around her faded. Not collapsed. Not gone. Just, settled. Like a sigh. The house exhaled. And for the first time since she arrived, Elena felt entirely still. She stood. The door behind her no longer led to the hallway. It led to the front porch. Afternoon light spilled across the floor. Birdsong. A breeze. And when she stepped through, barefoot, quiet, awake, she saw the forest no longer leaned inward. It stood tall. At peace. And the house behind her? Silent. Watching. Content. Elena stood on the porch as the breeze brushed her face. The fog had thinned. The trees stood quiet and still, their branches swaying with the rhythm of the wind, not reaching, not whispering, just being. She turned and looked at the house one last time. The roof, now free of moss. The shutters, gently swinging. The door, closed, but not locked. As if it waited for her return. Or for someone else entirely. She had no suitcase. No plans. Only the clothes she came in, and the small blue book still resting in her hand. Its pages now blank again. But heavier. Like it had been filled, and then erased, not out of loss, but out of completion. She didn't drive away. There was no car anymore. She simply began to walk. Down the gravel path. Through the quiet trees. Toward the unseen edge of a world she hadn't realized was hers all along. In the days that followed, though time passed differently here, the house stayed silent. But inside, something shifted. The crib in the attic no longer rocked. The guest book no longer changed. The mirror returned, but now it reflected only what was real. And the cellar pool? It was dry. Stone and dust. At peace. One afternoon, a child came to the house. She arrived with a note in her hand, written in soft, looping letters. It bore the same initials, M.W. The house opened easily for her. And inside, she found a chair waiting. And a music box that played a melody she had never heard before, but somehow knew by heart. The house had a new keeper now. But the old one had never truly left. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the quiet. Not in the walls. She was there in the soft hum of the floorboards. In the warmth of the sunlit rug in the hallway. In the way the cellar no longer whispered, but listened. In the way the attic cradle stayed still, content, empty. She was there. Watching softly. And the house? The house remembered.